What's up, fam? So I know it's been a long time since I made a video, but I've been watching stuff and I've been paying attention to the goings-ons in the black community and YouTube and Twitter on social media, and especially, I guess, the quote-unquote pro-black community. And there's a lot of things I've been having an opinion on, but it's just, I'm busy, got a life, obviously, work and stuff like that. I'm not going to college right now, but I was going back to college for a little bit for a few months. And just, I have so much and I see so much stuff that it gets draining and it gets frustrating. I'm sure a lot of you who have been trying to be pro-black or quote-unquote woke, and I mean the type of woke where you're the type of person who listens to a Tariq Nasheed or a Professor Black Truth or, some of our not ancient, but our older scholars and our ancestors like Khalid Muhammad and Dr. Ben Yakinen and Dr. Clark, and even though I don't, and Dr. Francis Quest Welsing, obviously, and obviously, even though all these ancestors are deceased, they lay the groundwork for people like Tariq Nasheed and stuff like that. And again, I can speak on Tariq later. I like Tariq a lot as far as like the stuff he says and the work he does. I don't agree with everything he does, and I'll probably make a video on that. Especially now that I'm back making videos, because I don't agree with some of the people he hasn't hit in Colors 5. But overall, I like the brother. I like the work he does. He's done a lot to help me become a quote-unquote woke person or conscious of white supremacy. Hidden Colors was one of my first introductions to this world. But anyway, I was saying all to say, those of you who are come from that sort of thinking or have the similar education on the system of white supremacy, you know how draining this can be, especially with so many black people being so clueless, falling for the same tricks over and over again. That's why they think they can come to us with these same tricks with Kamala Harris, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, those are just some of the reasons why I did make videos. Like I said, just busy with life. Number two, I mean, I see so much stuff happening. I can make a video every day, and I don't have the time to do that, obviously. And number three, even though I obviously don't have to make a video every day, just this work is extremely draining, as some of you may know. Obviously, some of you may not, but some of you may understand where I'm coming from, especially when it feels like you're one of the only black people who can see and understand the obvious trick bags of white supremacy. But anyway, for this video, I just wanted to make one quick point, just to keep it pretty short, about the Pan Africanism versus ADOS, or American Descendants of Slaves argument. Now, even though I haven't really seen this argument bubbling up too much yet, I can see it starting, and I can also see that the ADOS movement is gaining a lot of momentum because they're starting to be attacked by mainstream boule puppets like Angela Reed, Joy Reid, etc., Roland Martin, which I'm probably going to make a video about them too, but that's not what this video is about. So I just wanted to go ahead, and since the ADOS movement started by Yvette Carnell and Tone Talks is gaining steam to the point where it's being attacked and propagandized by mainstream media puppets of white supremacy, I decided to tackle this subject, especially since I saw two people debating it on Twitter, and I knew it's not happening that much now, but it's probably going to as this movement continues to gain steam, and that's the counter to being an ADOS, and that's being a Pan Africanist. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because I used to be a Pan Africanist, when I say that, I mean I believed in the things that Pan Africanism espoused. I can't say I was a practicing Pan Africanist, to be honest, but I guess because in order to be one, you would have to actually be making connections and doing things with African nations. But so me, I'm just an individual. So I wasn't a practicing Pan Africanism, but Pan Africanist. But I consider myself to at least, for the most part, agree with the ideologies of Pan Africanism. Now, for those of you who don't know, Pan Africanism is the old school ideology that all African or black people, or however you want to classify us or call us, all across the globe have a common struggle, and therefore we should unite under that common commonality, which is our heritage or our skin color or our phenotype or all of the above, and our culture, like I said, are all of the above, and use it as a unifying link against our unifying oppressor, our unified oppressor, which is white supremacy. And there's on the surface, there's nothing wrong with that. That's why I was considering myself one. I mean, even still to this day, that's true. A lot of the same problems that happen in America or that black people have in America are the same problems that they have in Africa, in South America, in Asia, et cetera, because we all have the same problem across the globe, which is white supremacy. So for that reason, I don't have a problem with Pan Africanism, and I feel that it makes sense because it's true. The general premise of the fact that all black people are under a system of white supremacy, I cannot disagree with. However, where I have, and obviously, and if I didn't kind of already explain, like I said, the ADOS movement is the American Descendants of Slaves. And that is basically a movement that says that black people in America have a specific lineage. Other immigrants, especially non-black immigrants, but even black immigrants, do not share that lineage. A lot of them undermine us, especially non-black immigrants, but even some, and what I'm starting to see more and more is a lot of black immigrants will undermine us and collaborate with the white supremacists to uphold our oppression. Like I said, especially these other non-black people who are also considered non-white, like Asians. They oppress and are racist towards blacks in almost all Asian countries. Same thing with Arabs in the Middle East, even though the Middle East doesn't exist. It's either Africa or Asia. All of them over there have a history of enslaving black people even earlier than the Europeans. They're still racist to this day. They're still enslaving black people in a lot of those countries. Saudi Arabia, which is a big time ally of the U.S. So, like I said, Asians, Arabs, Hispanics, and all these Latin American countries. I mean, the xenophobia that was going on with the Dominicans against the Haitians, that's just one. All the racism, police brutality, that's times 10 what it is in America that's going on in Brazil. So there's so many things that go on across the globe that all can be traced back to the system of white supremacy. And like I said, and I know I'm kind of rambling now, but all of these things can be traced back to the system of white supremacy, our common issues. But anyway, despite that, all that being the case, ADOS states that black Americans have a specific lineage, a specific heritage that is being undermined by these non-white racist immigrants. And that's where I kind of went off track. Is what I was saying was that the pointing out that the non-white, non-black immigrants are very racist towards black people in their various home countries. But that even includes a lot of black immigrants who come over here and they undermine us. They don't connect with our struggle. They come talking that I came from a poor place, so white supremacy isn't all that bad, and you guys just need to pick yourselves up, and you just need to be grateful for what you have, and you don't know what real oppression is, and these kind of things undermining us, right? So ADOS, and I'm not saying, because I'm not Yvette and Tone, I'm not saying these are the only reasons why they started the ADOS movement, but this is just me giving a general synopsis of them saying that African Americans are a unique group, a special group, that have a specific lineage in America. These other people are not from America. Even if they did deal with white supremacy in their countries, they are not from America. They do not have a specific, the same history, the same foundational history that black people have, where from the inception of this country, we have been working and been some of the primary labor force and wealth source for this country. We are not the wealthy people, but we have been the source of wealth, meaning people have used our bodies and our labor and our inventions to enrich themselves. And they've used it to enrich the United States, which is the most powerful country in the world. Arguably, I mean, some people may say other countries are more powerful, like China or whatever, but for the most part, it's generally agreed that the United States is still the most powerful, and has been for many decades, the most powerful country on the planet. Now, obviously, the conflict is between Pan Africans and ADOS. Is Pan Africans are saying you guys are, almost basically coons because you're clinging to this American identity when you're not American. Um, America has never treated Africans as Americans, et cetera, et cetera. And I've agreed with these things, which is why I used to consider myself a Pan Africanist. But I'm going to say the purpose of this video is for me to explain why I personally have shifted from the Pan Africanist side to the ADOS side. And why. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to bring up a tweet, and I'm going to use this tweet as a screenshot of this video, or the thumbnail of this video. But basically, it's a South African saying, broadly speaking, African Americans are so spectacularly clueless about the black world outside America that they use the same imperial eye of whiteness to understand us. Now, this tweet, as if I post it right, you're going to be able to see that this is not a response to someone else. This is not directed at any particular African American. This is just a general, broad, sweeping statement of African Americans. This is a South African who's in Africa, South Africa, where the white supremacists have totally dominated them. They are like 80% black people. Africans are 80% of the population in the country that's called South Africa, or over 80%. Yet they control less than 10% of the wealth. I brought up Tariq early in the video. Tariq went over there. He talked about how when he went over there, white people are in condos, and right across the street, black people are living in shacks. I'm not talking about a broke down house. I'm talking about a literal shack, like a metal plate as the roof, metal plates as the wall, and that's it. And then a dirt floor, like shit like that. Like that's how not all of them, but that's how whole communities of Africans, and that's how the majority of Africans in Africa are living. This is you in your own country being totally dominated by the white supremacists. These are the same people who, even though when I confronted them about it, a lot of them tried to deny it and put it on somebody else. It was all over the news. A lot of these same people are the ones who, when African immigrants were coming from other countries into South Africa, because even though the black people there are highly oppressed, South Africa is still one of the top 5 richest nations in Africa, because guess what? All the white people are there. So a lot of the white people who do live on the continent are living in Africa. That's one of the whitest, quote unquote, or most white controlled countries, even though they're only like 10% of the South African population. It's one of the most heavily white controlled countries. So for that reason, the economy is one of the best, because the white supremacists allow it to be a good economy because of the white people there, even though it's still a bad economy for the Africans because of this that's just how the system of white supremacy works. Black people always end up on the bottom. But compared to the other African countries, it was still a better place to live. And excuse me for the cough, fam. So these Africans were coming into illegally immigrating into South Africa, and you know what the South Africans were doing? Assaulting them, beating them up, killing some of them. This was all over the news, especially African news. A lot of them tried to deny it and say it was immigrants beating up other immigrants and all these weak ass deflections. But we know, just by the way you're coming out and making these broadside attacks on African Americans, that you have that in you. I bring up how tribal Africans are. Some Pan-Africanists will tell me that I'm bringing up a white supremacist talking point by pointing out that we're tribal. But we are tribal. There's nothing white supremacist about that. We're very tribal. That's why Nigerians come over here calling us Akadas. When I bring up Akadas to other Africans, they make sure to point out that it's Nigerians, that's specifically a Nigerian slur and not all Africans. So all of these things. Oh, and that's another thing too. The genesis of this gentleman's tweet, this South African gentleman's tweet, is saying things like all black people think that all Africans are the same, that Africa is a country, and that that we think that Africa is a country, that there's different countries like Nigeria and Ghana and all these places, and they have their own cultures and their own tribes, and we're ignorant fools who come over and call them Africans, and we think all Africans are the same, and Africa is just one big country. So it's Africans going out of their way to prove their differences, which is against your so-called Pan-Africanist ideology. This is Africans going out of their way to point out their distinctions and using that as one of the reasons to bash African Americans. It's to say that we don't understand how different they are. So don't tell me that tribalism is a white supremacist lie when the Africans are showing their own tribalism by making sure to point out to African Americans that they are from specific countries and from specific tribes. Speaking of that, that's also one of the things they use to bash us. We don't know our culture, we don't know our tribe, etc., etc., etc. So I'm bringing up a lot of the things that they use to bash us just to show that there is a lot of vitriol coming from immigrants towards African Americans. I have seen so much vitriol, and that was the thing that stopped me from being a Pan Africanist. That's when I realized that this is not going to work, because if we look at some of the things that has happened with Africa, Africa has not one single country, even Ghana, and I'm going to address Ghana in just a moment, but not one single African country has done anything to reach out to African Americans, to provide refuge to African Americans, to provide economic incentives for African Americans to come over there. See, when Pan Africans talk this return to home stuff, what's not being talked about is how, and this even ironically ties into the ADOS stance on immigration, is how difficult it is to get jobs and to be recognized as a citizen of these countries, even as compared to the U.S. Some of these African countries, it is almost impossible to be an immigrant to, because of the amount of red tape and paperwork that you have to go through. Not one African country has done anything to ease this paperwork, has done nothing to make it so that we can come and establish an economic base, get a job, provide for our families. No incentives of that. So you have to come over there and start from scratch. You have no political connections, no social connections, none of that. The economy's not as good as America, because as we just spoke, America is the most powerful economy in the world. So the economy's not better than America's. So the quality of living most times is not going to be quite as good. You don't have the resources to find jobs, things like that. You don't have a lot of these people get jobs or make money off familiar connections, like they're farmers and things like that. So it is so impractical for most. Obviously there has been some African Americans who have immigrated or expatriated to various African countries, Ghana, but not only Ghana, and Namibia, etc., and they're making it work. But for most African Americans, that would not be a practical situation, especially with African leaders doing nothing. They have not issued a sanction on America. They have not offered any refuge to African Americans, not an economic incentive, nothing. Even Ghana, and that's what I was saying with Ghana, who's done a so-called right to abode program, where African Americans can come and live over in Ghana, and they basically never have to leave. They're not citizens, but they don't have to leave. They can live and work and just stay there. They're not going to get deported. That's basically what is a promise. Even with that policy in place, Rita Marley, who had lived in Ghana for 20 years, it took her 20 years or almost 20 years to get her Ghanaian citizenship. Do you know what it takes if a person legally immigrates to America? It takes them like 5 years at the most to become a citizen. It took Rita Marley 20 years to become a legal citizen of Ghana. But you want to sit up here and tell me that and these are people with African countries, African governments. They have way more power over their own destiny than African Americans have over their destiny. Yet, these Pan-Africans, who I want to point out, the majority of them are African Americans. It's not Africans leading the Pan-African charge, unfortunately. Not now. Maybe you want to argue Kwame Nkrumah and all them people, but even then I can argue other people like Delaney and those people were the fathers of Pan-African Americans, were the fathers of Pan-Africanism. But these mostly American Pan-Africanists put the entire burden of and that's why they're attacking ADOS, is because they put the entire burden of Pan-Africanism on African Americans, even though we are not the ones who have the same control over our destiny as Caribbean countries that are full of black people with black governments and black prime ministers, and these African countries that are full of black people with black governments and black leaders. But it's on us to lead the Pan-African charge and lead the Pan-African way, when as I've already talked about in this video, but I can provide more receipts of the vitriol that Africans and Caribbeans have towards African Americans. Why would we do that? It's a waste of time. And speaking of, I mentioned Dr. Frances Cress Welsing at the beginning of the video. Speaking of Dr. Neely Fuller, her mentor, he talked about how black people are too toxic to be getting together in large groups and trying to work together like that. That's not exactly what he said, obviously, but that's the general synopsis of what he said. And even though I don't agree with everything Neely Fuller said, just like I don't agree with everything Tariq says, even though I'll give him props, or I definitely don't agree with everything Yvette says, but I'll give her props, or Tone Talks, or Professor Black Truth, or Jason Black. I don't agree with everything all these people say. But what I will say is that I agree with a lot of what they say, and at the end of the day, they're on code to topple white supremacy, which is the most important thing, or at least they appear to be. Maybe something will come out about some of these people later on, and it'll turn that they were frauds. But for now, they all appear to be on code to topple white supremacy. And I'm saying that to say Neely Fuller talked about us being toxic around each other, and even though I don't agree with that in total, I do agree with that with African Americans and Africans and Caribbeans, African Americans and the rest of the diaspora. The relationship right now is too toxic. I know why, because I know what the excuse would be. Like I said, there was an exchange on Twitter. I was actually involved in the exchange about Pan Africanism versus ADOS. And one of the excuses would be, well, African countries, they don't have the power. Their leaders get assassinated every time they try to reach out to African Americans. Well, that's the point. That's the problem. They already don't have enough power to reach out to us. They're so powerless that they control a whole country, yet their whole country can still be controlled by white people assassinating their leaders and destroying their economy so they can't reach out to black people. So you're too powerless. You got too many issues to worry about to help out African Americans. Well, guess what? African Americans are too powerless too. We can't even stop Tamir Rice. We can't even get Tamir Rice justice. We can't even get 12-year-old boys justice. So if you're too powerless to be a Pan-Africanist, and we're too powerless to be a Pan-Africanist, and there's all this poison and vitriol, because I know all the excuses about how we say things like African booty scratchers as children and all of this. Guess what? I got called short as a kid. Is that an excuse for me to be a coon, a Sambo, a race trader because I got called short as a child? That's just a rite of passage for American kids. I'm sorry if African children don't understand what it's like to be teased. I'm sorry if Africans don't do teasing. I'm sorry if Africans don't have a sense of humor. I'm sorry if that's just some white supremacist thing to have a sense of humor and to deal with childhood teasing. But if it is, it's just what it is, because black people, we grew up in the belly of the beast. Black Americans, we grew up in the belly of the beast. But my thing is when you bring up these childhood insults, because that's 90% of the complaint against us is bringing up childhood insults. If you're going to hold a grudge against us for some childhood insults, why don't you have that same energy against white supremacists who colonized your countries, who raped your wives, raped your children, steal all your resources to this day, and are the reason why you have to come to America and even interact with a African American who you claim is so ignorant and so low class and has no culture and no connection to their tribe? The reason why you're even over here to meet one of us is because of what the white supremacists, what the Asian supremacists, because that's basically what they are now, dominating different countries in Africa, marrying up all the women so they can create these half-breed children who will be loyal to China. All of this stuff. You don't have the Arabs who, like I said, have this history of enslaving Africans, have taken over North Africa, claim to call themselves Africa, but make sure to distinguish North Africa from the rest of Africa because they're not you black ass niggas, even though they are the ones who removed and killed the original black people that were in the place that's called North Africa and Middle East. Now that's home to black people too. All of that is where all of those places black people are indigenous to. They are the original people of those areas. But now you got Arabs taking over parts of Africa, calling themselves African when it's convenient, like when they want to have some fake unity with black people or want to try to claim access to our resources or anything that may be coming to Africa that's beneficial. They'll claim to be African. But any other time where they want to distinguish themselves from dark Africans, they make sure they call themselves North Africans. All of these people in Africa right now who have a history of doing much worse things than calling you a goddamn African booty scratcher. And you're not having this energy towards them, but you want to hold lifelong grudges towards African Americans. So again, fam, this video, even though it's not that long, it's going on longer than I intended. But at the end of the day, this is why I agree with, and maybe I'll do another version of this or something. But at the end of the day, this is why I agree with ADOS over Pan Africanism, because at the end of the day, we're just too toxic to each other. African Americans have to get their issues right first. We have to get our power right first. We have to get our reparations first. And then we can maybe have some resources and some power to go over to African countries and make some connections. Africans, they need to work on getting them damn white supremacists, them Arabs and them Asians up out of Africa. They need to get them to stop taking control of all the resources. And then maybe they can do something to reach out to African Americans. But until then, you Pan-Africanists, all you're doing is chasing your tail, spinning your wheels, and living in a dream world. And I promise you, and I will have a debate with any Pan-Africanist. If you have a YouTube channel, whatever, you want to invite me on your platform, I might even reach out to certain Pan-Africanists that I know to have a debate about this, to make this conversation, to put this discussion in the ether. But at the end of the day, if you are a Pan-Africanist, you are chasing your tail, you are running in circles, and you will get nowhere because you are not putting the right priorities in place. You refuse to recognize the reality of immigrant undermining of African Americans. You refuse to accept the reality of African jealousy of African Americans because we're so visible. That's what a lot of it is, and that's the last thing I want to say. A lot of this poison that African immigrants have towards us is because we're so visible. We're the face of black people on the planet, whether they want to admit it or not. When anybody across the planet thinks of black people, they think of Michael Jackson, Jay-Z, these kind of people. They don't think of the hot rap star in Nigeria, which, by the way, if there's rappers in Nigeria, they got that from African Americans. And I don't want to hear about how rap had African or Jamaican origins. African Americans still made rap what it is today, this global sensation it is today. And if you really want to go that deep, I have receipts that it was actually an American that started rap. Even if it came from quote unquote African roots or African music, it's still a uniquely African American art form. So if you got Nigerian rappers, what was the appropriating African American culture, because that's the thing they'll use towards us. That's another vitriolic thing I've heard from African immigrants is we can't wear dashikis and things like that to try to show connection to Africa because we don't understand the tribes, and we're just like a white person appropriating their culture because we don't have a connection to the actual tribe that wears XYZ dashiki and we don't know what it means, and we're fetishizing Africanists, blah, 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 blah. So I'm saying all that to say it's too much poison. It's too much poison, too much hatred coming from African immigrants, and they're too powerless to actually help us or do anything for us that's practical. So the only thing they've done as a majority is undermine us. And I don't say this to be hateful towards African immigrants. I don't say this because I don't like immigrants. And this is not just Africa. Everything I'm saying also applies to Caribbean immigrants. And my girlfriend is Haitian. And I'm not saying that I don't want to be like a white person. Oh, my girlfriend's black, so that means I'm not racist. But what I'm saying is I don't have hatred for immigrants. I still have some of that Pan-African love. I still support you. I still have, I guess, that solidarity with you when you're dealing with white supremacy in your countries and things like that. But at the same time, I can't cape for you no more. My political priorities has to be African Americans, because every time I try to join up with an immigrant, more times than not, they have an undermining, jealous attitude towards African Americans, and it is undeniable. And we don't have any more time to waste. We have to get on some kind of code. Africans are too powerless in their own country. We're too powerless in this country. Let's get power in our country, and then they can get power. Try to get power in your country, and whoever gets power first, maybe we can help bring the other person first. But in the meantime, while we both powerless, I can't feed you while I'm still starving. It's like in an airplane, they tell you if in the event of a crash, the mask come down, and they tell you always put your mask on first before you put a mask on your child, because you have to be able to breathe in order to successfully put the mask on your child. Because if you don't and you try to put the mask on your child, you both might die in the process of you trying to put the oxygen mask on your child. Those of you who fly know what I'm talking about. You all that it's the instructions are clear. Put your mask on first before you put it on your child. So if we are both weak, we are both starving, I have to feed myself first in order to have the strength to feed you. So Pan Africanists, I'm sorry, but y'all just gotta chill. If you don't chill, then you don't. But you're gonna be chasing your tail. You're gonna be wasting your time. You're gonna be putting yourself in your own trick bag, because you won't face reality. You won't face the hatred and the jealousy and the vitriol that African and Caribbean immigrants have towards African Americans. And a lot of it's unfounded outside of African booty scratcher comments, but they don't have that same energy for the people who disenfranchise them on a daily in their countries. Even these Caribbean countries, the reason why they're poor, even though there's not really that many people of other races, the reason why the countries, third world countries, is because of white people. But you don't have this energy for them, only us. But anyway, I digress, fam. You know, I'm making this video on my work lunch break, and I'm already over it. So let me get back to work, fam. I'm gonna upload this video, and hopefully it wasn't too rambling. I'll try to share it. You guys let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe. Peace. Yes, I'm back, and I'm definitely going to try to make videos a lot more often. I know I said that a few months ago, and then I didn't make any more videos, but I'm serious this time. We'll see the pattern. I don't want to commit to a pattern, so I don't back out on my word. But it'll definitely be more frequent than it was before. It'll be at least every couple of weeks at worst, if not every week or every few days. But anyway, this is your boy Morpheus Unplugged, signing out. Peace.